Welcome to the Living Out podcast, helping people, churches, and society talk about faith and sexuality.
Welcome to the Living Out podcast. My name's Andy, and you join us in a series where we're thinking about how those who experience same-sex attraction can flourish. Today we're dealing with the issue of the fact that we may get asked questions, particularly if our sexuality is something that people know about. And that can be both a privilege, but also slightly weird in terms of not many people get asked random questions about their sexuality. So we're going to think together as to how to handle that wisely and well. And I'm thrilled that we've got both an old friend with us and somebody new to the podcast. So Anne, welcome back. You were the one who launched all of this, so it's great to have you back with us. You doing okay?
I'm doing okay, thank you. Yeah, it's really nice to see your smiling face on the Zoom again.
Oh, that's kind. And Laurence, welcome. Really good to have you with us. Do you want to tell us a little bit about where you are and what you do?
Thanks for having me. I'm originally from the Netherlands, actually. Born and raised. My parents are Indonesian immigrants before I was born, but feel very Dutch, very European. Lived there for 36 years of my life, and then I moved to Colorado Springs in Colorado, US, to be part of the navigators there. I was in college ministry in Amsterdam for 15 years before I moved here. So I'm currently in the US.
Great. Well, it's been lovely to get to know you in a couple of contexts where we've had you over as a team. And great to have you here. We have the obligatory relaxed intro question. And it's actually on the theme of questions today because that's the topic for the podcast. So if you had to get to know somebody, what question might you use to get to know them better? Anne, you've probably got an answer to this. Well, what question would you use to help you get to know somebody?
Oh, I've got two go-to questions. One of them is, what's your favourite animal? I love that because most people like animals in some capacity, and it kind of you don't like animal. Andy, come on, you've ruined it already. Okay.
Anyway, come on, tell us your second question.
My second question is, what are you reading? You would definitely be able to answer that.
Okay, we'll do that.
So, I mean, obviously not everybody reads, but it's often a good launching pad into, what people care about. Or it might be, what podcast are you listening to or what music. So just, something that they're enjoying at the moment that they could talk a bit more about.
Great. Laurence, do you have a question you use to get to know people?
I think where you're from is a very common question that I think, especially in my world of doing a lot of cross-cultural stuff right now, ministry as well. It's like where you're from is a very interesting question. Also being in the US, that makes, because people usually don't live anymore where where they were born or where they grew up. And the second question, to really get to know someone is I often ask people now, like, what is your story? And then go from there.
Good question.
Yeah, I mean, the question I often ask, I guess probably not the first time I'm meeting somebody because that would be slightly weird, but if I'm trying to get to know people better, I often ask some variety of, hey, what's good, what's hard at the moment? It is a question I often ask, which is partly to try and encourage get beyond fine, or as a sort of how are you question. And it both hopefully enables people to talk about stuff that they're finding difficult, which certainly English people, sometimes it can be hard to get to the sort of deeper level. But also for those who tend to be sort of dark and gloomy, asking what's good at the moment can help them to think about something that's positive. So I don't know, what's good, what's hard is often a question I will ask as I go through life. Great. So I thought it'd be a good opportunity for us to catch up with Anne. So, Anne, people will be very pleased to hear you again. What have you been up to since we heard from you last on the podcast?
I think when I was last on the podcast, I might have been working for the civil service. I did do that for a little bit, which was a great sort of stepping stone. But I'm not doing that anymore. I've developed what you might call a portfolio career. So I've got my fingers in lots of pies at the moment. So I'm doing some mental health research with PhD students at Newcastle University. I'm also setting up a social enterprise with a friend. We're going to run percussion workshops for well-being, and that's kind of born out of the samba drumming band that I'm in. We just wanted to take that to the next level. And I'm also doing some freelance writing and working on a book at the moment. So it's quite hard to actually describe what I do, but that's it.
It's great. That's great to hear. That's a fun mixture of stuff. And Laurence, conscious we've got you here for the first time. So do you want to? I mean, actually, you mentioned the sort of tell me your story. So could you tell us your story and essentially why we've got you on the podcast?
Sure. As I said, child of Indonesian immigrants to the Netherlands. And I think that's part of where my story starts, where I think my parents had always a sense of not belonging. Even in Indonesia, they were part of a Chinese minority. So my dad grew up Christian, actually, and my mom Catholic. And my dad had a real relationship with Jesus, but because of their ethnic background, they were not really accepted in that time in Indonesia. And so my father got a job in the Netherlands, so they moved, and even there, they tried to really adapt and to belong in Dutch society, learn the language, gave us children European names, but there was always this sense of not belonging. And I think as a sensitive person or kind of picking up on those signals, I think that's part of my narrative as well. And it's part of I would almost say my core lies are still there. And I think out of that, I just started, I think when I became more of a teenager, like early teens, like 10 years old, 11, very much self-aware of who I was, that I was not in a particular way. Very insecure about myself, started to look into the outside world and how I should be. I think part of that was my development of sexuality at the same time as well. And in the very early, I think, puberty phase, started to develop same-sex attractions, didn't have the language for that, didn't had any, experienced a lot of shame with it. And at the same time, also a very, real relationship with Jesus that started at the same time, through encounter with his spirit and just really wanting to follow him. But then I think in my whole teenage years, there was this whole trajectory of seeing myself spiritually grow, and at the same time, my sexuality in a particular direction that I didn't want it to go, or that I was denying that it was going there. But I was pretty much in denial. I remember a friend of mine, a schoolmate of mine, asked me one moment, like really straight, of like, "Are you gay?" And I was like, "How dare you even ask that of me or think that of me?" And I think there was this so much self-rejection, I think, in that phase, and just that I couldn't and didn't want to deal with it. But I think in the moments of my desperation, where I was really crying out to God, that I always experienced his presence and his embrace. And I think I was 17 when there was this time of worship, where I was in a conference, and there was this very deep encounter with the Father's love. That I think that year, 17, just realizing, in kind of the sense of the story of the prodigal son, that I was embraced by God before I even needed to be transformed. And so I felt really safe there. And I think that's where I was able to come out and, in that sense, admit to myself what was going on. And that was the start of the journey to surrender everything. And I think I said to the Lord, if you love me this much and embrace me this much, then I want to surrender my life to you. And I don't know how to fix this or how to deal with this. But it started the journey of surrendering my sexuality with him, because out of the response of how I was loved by him. And so, that started kind of my story. And then so I became part of the Navigators as a student and came on staff with them in student ministry. And then I saw also that the Lord was using to my story to help and disciple others. Not even in sexual kind of stories necessarily, but just this whole element of surrender and what does God do in the middle of brokenness that I was allowed to just share out of others people, out of my own life to other people. So that's kind of how I started to, yeah, be part of ministry as well.
Thanks, Laurence. That's hugely encouraging to hear. I guess, I mean, the three of us on the podcast, we've been speaking publicly about sexuality for a number of years now. Thinking of those who might be listening who experience same-sex attraction, maybe they're gradually talking to more people. And I guess as they do that, as we've done that, it means people will come back at us with questions and so on. How do you guys feel, when questions come up, maybe just asking for more information, maybe asking some pretty personal stuff, maybe coming with sort of theological questions? I don't know, how have you felt as questions have come up? Anne, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be honest, it very much depends on the context, on what sort of things they're asking, and on the attitude of the questioner as well. I mean, I've had some people who have been coming from quite a hostile posture and they want to ask me questions about sexuality, not because they're interested in the answer, but because they want to have a go at me because they think I'm a bigot. And obviously it takes quite an emotional toll, that kind of thing. If I know it's not going to be a helpful conversation, I try to sort of unpick their motivation a little bit more by asking them questions, or try to move the conversation on if it's just becoming antagonistic and we're not going to get anywhere fruitful. I think it can also be a little bit hard when people's questions betray a real ignorance or a lack of understanding. I found that particularly with Christians, when they just ask really ignorant questions, it makes me feel very lonely and isolated, like you just don't get me, I think we've come a long way certainly the last decade or so, but there are reminders everywhere that churches need to do more to understand sexuality and how people like me experience it. I'd start off with the negative, because actually I really like getting asked questions. If the person is kind and genuinely wants to know, then usually I really love it, because it shows that they're interested in something which I've spent my entire life wrestling through. Faith and sexuality both are very important to me and to my story. So I'm usually happy to talk about it with people who are genuinely interested. I think it communicates care, and it's a great opportunity to get to know them better and to hear their views as well, if we do it well as a sort of mutual discussion.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, it has always been the practice of what is the attitude, or even sometimes the question underneath the question that our people are asking. And even ignorant question that comes out of a kind of a heart that is just curious and wonders and really wants to know better. I don't mind then if it's maybe ignorant or just, like that. But if it's the heart posture is such a thing for me. And I do have a sensitivity for that. And at the same time, I think in answering or how to receive these questions, I go back to my own heart posture as well. That when it's hostile, how do I don't respond in that same heart? And if someone's really genuine but ignorant, that I can just also be genuine. And sometimes even in the way I speak, sometimes I also invite those questions to come in. I think that's also a little bit the trade-off sometimes in how you present yourself and how you share your story, that you get particular questions. So it's kind of also, there's a fairness in sometimes in how you portray yourself that the questions then come back. So yeah, I do like that underlayer of thinking, because I think when you start sharing your story or speaking in publicly, I think there's a lot of carefulness that you have to do so. Yeah.
I think my reflection is that I've gone through different stages on this. So I think in my early years, when I was just a handful of people knew, and I was sort of slightly insecure about the whole thing as well. Probably questions made me nervous, if that makes sense. There was a kind of, I was just getting used to sort of giving up my privacy to a certain extent, and so what are people going to ask me, and so on. Over the years, I think that's changed, and I think part of me wants to encourage those who are sort of taking initial steps with sharing and initial steps in giving up their privacy and perhaps finding questions hard. Just say it does get easier. You do get used to it. And I think I'm with both of you guys in terms of I quite enjoy getting questions now, because certainly from friends, because it shows they're interested.
Mm-hmm.
It shows they care, and what's this like for you? When is it hardest? All of questions like that. I just really appreciate, and even questions from people I know less well, where there's just an obvious, genuine desire to understand. I just think is a huge privilege, actually. So for the most part, it's changed over the years, but these days I generally welcome questions, I think.
Yeah, I was actually reflecting on that the fact that I sometimes wish that some of my friends and community would ask more questions, how particular things were me. I was like, oh, I do miss that, actually, that you show interest in a little bit of my story and how it was. So it's like, oh, I wish that some people would ask more questions, actually.
Sorry to interrupt this edition of the Living Out podcast, but I'm here to tell you about our first ever book that we've published, and it's called A Better Love, and it contains 18 stories of meeting Jesus in the tension of faith and sexuality. We've written it, like so much of what we do, to share our stories of the goodness of Jesus and of how he helps us live for him today. You'll meet so many of my friends in this book. You'll benefit from hearing their perspectives, their stories of the better love they found in Jesus. It'll be a great read for you if you're a Christian. It'll be a great read for you if you're not yet a Christian but want to find out how people who are same-sex attracted can meet Jesus in that tension of faith and sexuality and discover life to the full in him. Go to our website and the shop on it to get hold of a copy. It's available both as a physical copy here in the UK and as an ebook further afield. Enjoy.
So let's move on to thinking about some of the specific questions that we might get asked. So, Laurence, can I come to you first? Within the church, what kind of questions do you get asked when it comes to sexuality?
Yeah, I think there's usually two categories for me. One of them is more on the personal level, and then it's more on the theological level. I love the personal level ones. I was speaking to a teenage group a month ago, 2 months ago, and they were listening to my story, and the first girl that asked, she was 16, and she's like, let me get this straight. So you're never had sex and you're never gonna have sex. And I just love that kind of the innocence of that story, of that question. And I just start laughing. It's like, this is such a fun question that no adult would ever ask me. So I think I love those questions of like, it's unfiltered. It's all, but some of them are very sensitive. And I really enjoy that because I do think I lead with vulnerability. I want them to ask these questions. The other questions of categories that more the theology, and it's very practical theology. I think it's always around the dichotomy for posture and position. Can I go to attend my gay friend's wedding, for instance? Positionally, theologically, I don't agree with this, but I want to love them well. And that tension and how to help people, that is often the most questions that I get in Christian circles.
Yeah, thanks. What about for you, Anne? Similar?
Yeah, I mean, I think the questions have changed a lot over the last 30 years. So when I first became a Christian, there used to be radio silence most of the time. And then people would ask things like, have you asked God to change your sexuality? Or how can you be a Christian with same-sex attraction? I think now things, people have kind of got a lot more understanding in a lot more ways. And actually, almost, it's questions from progressive Christians, things like, how can God say no to loving gay relationships? How can you believe in a God that won't let you have sex ever again? And just questions around the plausibility of being a celibate, same-sex attracted Christian. Laurence was saying, never having sex. How is that plausible in today's society? So I think those are the questions that I seem to get asked a lot more, which I kind of find more interesting, actually, because I think, there's an assumption that, it should be easy to live as a Christian, but it's never been easy to live as a Christian. There's always been a cost. It's always been countercultural, and it's just countercultural in a very obvious way when it comes to sexuality. But I think that gives great opportunities to go into, well, what is sexuality for? What, let's unpick this thing that we call sex and work out, what it exists for, and what the Christian story is around that. But yeah, and questions like, very practically, should I go to a gay wedding? That kind of thing. In fact, some of the things that we've done Living Out podcasts on before. So just a little plug for the other series. There's lots of good answers to those kind of awkward questions on the site.
Yeah, you haven't lost your ability as a producer, Anne. Well done.
I just can't help it.
No, it's fine. I find quite a generational difference, actually. So when I'm talking to the generation younger than me, often it will be the more personal question. The generation above me, if they still exist, they're the group who will ask more the sort of theological type, impersonal questions. So I can normally look around the room and kind of guess which question I'm going to get more of. But I agree with you. Funnily enough, I quite enjoy talking about the personal questions as well. Any wisdom on how to handle those questions? Anything you've picked up over the years as a general approach to answering questions?
I've become more and more convinced that telling the whole story of biblical sexuality is where it's at. Because I used to go to the club of passages and I used to say, look, here it says in the Bible that it's wrong. But actually, I think the picture that God paints of what sex is for and the spiritual significance of it is actually amazing. And once people start to understand that, then the sort of individual, what can I do with another person in the bedroom, it becomes much less relevant. So I like to tell people that sex isn't just, a pleasurable physical act between two people who fancy each other. It's loaded with this spiritual significance because it's designed to show what God's like and how faithful he is to his people who he loves. And when we see it like that, we can see that it's a blueprint for human flourishing. Then it kind of makes sense of all the prescriptions. And it just shows so beautifully God's steadfast love for his people. And that's something that's really good news to invite people into. People that, I've got a lot of non-Christian friends who are lesbians because I'm in this samba drumming band. I could take the approach of telling my lesbian friends that sleeping with their girlfriends is morally wrong. Or I could show that they can experience deep and everlasting intimacy with the perfectly loving God who made them. And that just seems like a much better story to tell. And I can tell from my own personal experience that I have encountered this God who loves me. And, giving up sex is just a tiny thing in comparison to everything that I gain through having a relationship with Jesus. So I tend to take that kind of approach, yeah.
Yeah, I think in a Christian setting, I think has been so important to me, and similar with Anne, is creating the context that we're not just talking about homosexuality or same-sex attracted Christians, but we're talking about everyone, that the gospel of sexuality that is in there and how God is right in the middle of it, confronts everyone with their own sexuality in how to live according to his standards. And I think that levels the playing field in the sense of, okay, for me as a same-sex attracted person, that means this particular way of like, I need to follow Jesus in this. But you as a heterosexual couple or single, it's the same calling in some level. And how do you live out your life and sexuality according to his purpose and his narrative and his story? And there's a beauty around that. And I think when I start doing that, kind of bringing all these questions in a context of the whole, there's I think it's so much fun because then nobody's in the room then that's like, oh, this is for them specifically, but this should also is confronting in some level for me and how I live my life in conviction and in actions that is according to his standards.
Yeah, I think there's a call to all Christians. I think you're right that often, big button issues like homosexuality have been kind of singled out, but actually there's a call to all Christians to live completely counterculturally when it comes to our sexuality. Our values are completely different to the world's values, and I think we've got into a little bit of a mess with gay marriage and stuff like that because we actually haven't taken seriously, not cohabiting or not dating a non-Christian and that kind of thing. So, I like the fact that questions about sexuality lead to bigger questions about, singleness and marriage and what it means to steward our sexualities well, however that looks in our lives.
I mean, I think for me, I become one of those irritating people who respond to a question by asking a question. And so very often I will come back with, thanks so much for asking that. Is there a particular reason you're asking that? And that's partly because often I think the reason people won't ask questions about sexuality increasingly, I think, is because it's connected to a family member or connected to a friend. Often, actually, more than it's personal for them, it is for somebody close to them. And it's quite useful to know that because it slightly impacts the tone in which I'm going to answer. And so, I've increasingly become let me respond to your question with a question, and only then will I get into trying to work through an answer. But yeah, maybe that's just me.
No, that's very wise, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I used to think people were just asking questions out of intellectual curiosity, but more and more the people that have questions tend to be people whose son has just come out as gay or, who have just been invited to a gay wedding and just don't know what to do because they want to love their friends well.
Yeah.
So I think that's very wise. There's usually a question behind the question somewhere, as Laurence said earlier.
And any thoughts? I mean, Anne's sort of alluded to the Samba group already, but Laurence, if you got any particular thoughts on dealing with questions when it comes up from folk who aren't Christians, does that make any difference to you?
Well, I would definitely do what you do, and that's kind of what I learned to also ask is like, what's the follow-up question? Why you're asking these questions? Because I do think that a lot of the questions that come from a non-Christian background or what I've encountered, it comes from, I'm going to test you. I want to see if you're this Christian that just is a judgmental person. And so, what does the Bible teach about homosexuality? What do you think that God thinks about homosexuals? All of these questions. I would always refer back to, well, that's such an interesting question. Where this is coming from? And some of my friends who've been more in the with the students on campus, and that they often say to them like, "Hey, it seems like there's a lot of story that you have around this question. I would love to take you out for lunch. I just want to hear your story." And I think, how can you be disarming when it's there? I think overall people can handle particular disagreements about things, but I think people just want to be heard. And I think that's the first entryway in building relationships. So that's usually kind of what I would say.
I think, in answering them, I'm trying to go as far back as possible, actually, as well, in terms of essentially our view of sexuality. And the reason we live as we do emerges from our view of the universe, essentially, that life is at its best when we acknowledge God is at the center of the universe. And so often I'm trying to get the phrase, hey, Andy, why on earth do you live like you do? Well, it's because of what I think the universe is about, is a phrase I try and use quite a lot. And then that might get the follow-up question, what do you think the universe is about? Which actually, funnily enough, I quite like that question. So I'm trying to move backwards as to the reason I make the decisions I do is because God's our creator, is because Jesus is worth living for, and trying to get as far back as possible because we make the decisions we do because of prior decisions about who God is, who we are, who Jesus is, and trying to get back there, I think can be really important.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing to add is that I used to feel like I was a bit of a salesperson for Jesus, and I had to have the perfect answer for everything. You know, that I was on the front line when I was with non-Christians, and I had to make sure I gave a really good biblical answer. And I think now I've just got loads of non-Christian friends, many of whom are gay, and often they will ask me really personal questions like, you know, don't you want a girlfriend or something like that? And, you know, sometimes it is painful to answer, you know, because I have had relationships in the past and I have got, you know, people who aren't in my life anymore, and that hurts. But I think it's okay to share that with my non-Christian friends as well. You know, a dose of reality is quite helpful. I don't have to pretend that it's always easy to be single or it's always easy to be same-sex attracted and say no to a relationship, because then they actually see that the cost of following Jesus is worth it. You know, if I'm only trying to sort of put on a show that being a Christian's great, it is great, but sometimes it's hard and sometimes you cry. And you know, I think I've noticed that my friends just want me to live real life alongside them, and actually that's been the biggest opening for the gospel than anything else I could have done or said. Yeah.
Any last thoughts then? The series is about how we flourish. So anything that's helped you to flourish as you receive questions around sexuality?
I find questions generally really honouring because they show somebody's desire to get to know you more, you know, and to think about things and to learn. I think one of the most frustrating things is when no one asks anything, they're just not bothered. And I think questions are a really good two-way thing as well. Obviously, one of Jesus's favourite relational tools was asking questions to get, you know, to challenge people, to explore truth, to build friendships. A few top tips for handling questions for Christians. I think don't be afraid of questions, but, you know, see them as an opportunity to build closer relationships and share our faith in a winsome way. I found it really helpful to anticipate questions that I might get and kind of just prepare some things to say, not like written down necessarily, but, you know, if somebody asks me, you know, why are you a Christian? Having a few ideas of what to say to that is good. Or what would I say if someone asked me, you know, should I go to a gay wedding or something like that? But it's also good to acknowledge that some questions are tough. You know, we all have questions that we can't answer ourselves, whether we're Christians or atheists or Muslims or whatever. So we can be honest when we don't know how to respond. I think one thing that I've really found helpful is to offer to find out more from my friend, or even better, to say, should we look into this together and maybe look at the Bible or get a book and, you know, read it together and discuss it, or listen to a podcast or something like that, kind of go on a journey of discovery together. So yeah, I think questions can be really good. And if we're a little bit prepared, they can be really helpful to build relationship.
Yeah, and I would add into that your own heart posture again. If you're not ready to receive questions yet, because there's so much stuff that's kind of still internal, I would say don't share your story too much then. Share it with trustworthy people that you love and have good relationships with. But when you start receiving questions, can you have a posture of grace and that you give people the benefit of the doubt, where they're coming from, that you can embrace their ignorance in some level too. Because I think that will help you flourish too, that you don't take things that personally, but you can leave that with the other person then too. I think that's where I sometimes, when it becomes hard for myself to receive, then I'm like, oh, I need to do some more work in my heart as well in order to do this well.
Well, Laurence, Anne, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom on this. Great to have you on the podcast. Do check out the Living Out website. As I mentioned, quite a lot of the questions that we get asked most often, there are either podcasts or articles or blogs on that theme. But thank you so much for listening. But for now, it's goodbye.
It's goodbye from him. It's goodbye from me. I always want to say that.